Okay, after our deep technical consultation up here, I would like to introduce you to our next speakers, and there's a story behind this. You may have heard that a few months ago, the federal government examined the Dominion voting systems from Puerto Rico. They will tell you the story about this. These are the two men who did that examination, Jason Wareham and Manbir Gulati. And so they're going to tell you the story behind that and what they found.
Thank you. Hi, as you said, my name is Jason Wareham. I'm CEO of Mojave Research. And let me just lead with the best way that I describe our interaction and entry into the voting machine world, fraught as it is that we are the unwitting experts in one very specific Dominion voting system. I say unwitting because there was at no time in my life where I sought to enter this arena, but it was thrust upon us, and we found ourselves in somewhat of an unexpected but very interesting space. To briefly outline the story, just so you have the full color of context. It was about fall of 2024 when my team and we had begun working on an agentic secure product, trying to secure end-to-end large language model, public models, so that we could exchange private data. Now, for most who may know something about that space, ultimately the GPU firmware issues and the GPU's chip problems have kind of undermined our work in that area. But while we were working on that product, through my network in DC, the Director of National Intelligence called. It was a surprise call. She said, why don't you come on over? We've heard you've got another kind of agentic solution that we need your help with on one of our classified networks. And I will highlight for everyone, nothing today is classified, obviously, that we're talking about, wholly unclassified. Yeah, and let me just tell you, I've worked in classified litigation and classified space for a long time. I've never learned one interesting classified fact, ever. And I have the very highest clearance available, and almost every time I learn something, I'm like, that shouldn't be classified, but okay. So we were working on that issue, and my team was a bunch of former spooks, frankly, in reverse engineering and forensics. We were working on different stuff. And when the Director Initiatives Group director came to us one day and said, hey, we've got an opportunity to examine voting machines, right? And I don't know if you've heard, there's kind of been a lot of discussion and debates about the security of voting systems since 2020, of which we take no position. But he said, could your team just roll down to Puerto Rico and get a forensic image of these? It's the first time that we're aware that we were able to capture a Dominion voting system where the vendor was not involved and had been live in an election, right? And this is important from a forensic analysis standpoint, where you want to try to understand exactly what was going on at the time and what is in production. Ultimately, I made the worst decision of my life in a business context and said, sure, in fact, it's not a problem. I've got the guys. I'm not even going to charge you extra for it. We'll just keep it on the same contract. No big deal. I regret that deeply, and I'm surprised no one's fired me yet for that decision. So we rolled down to Puerto Rico. What I thought was going to take 2 days took 4. It's an enormous system. We imaged the entire election management system, as well as took back some of the machines that you see over there in the other side of the village. And we brought it back, started working on it. Let me just answer the upfront question everybody else asks me usually, which is, why was the DNI involved? I can tell you, all the people that I worked with were nothing but the highest professionals, just worried about what national security implications or what is true about our voting infrastructure. Good questions to ask. So we brought it back and we got to work. One last final piece of color before I turn it over to the guy who I'm very glad I have on my team, because he knows a whole great deal more about this stuff than I do, is what was interesting is they were supposed to get us a white line so that we could meaning an unfiltered internet access line where we could start to work on this material in an unclassified space. I have no idea why to this day, but their systems were screening us pretty aggressively. We couldn't get any of our tools to work. And so where this work ultimately got done was my basement in Reston, Virginia. I pulled us out, I rolled down to our basement, and we got done in about 6 weeks, what would take most people 6 months. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for Manbir Gulati, he's my Chief Technical Officer, to discuss exactly what we found when we started peeling into this and the implications for the future.
Thanks, Jason. So, can you guys hear me okay? Yep. So, basically, what we found was, we were not brought on to necessarily pen test or do a software code review. What I will take you to is the forensic analysis we did and how we forensically analyzed the voting system to gain access to it, what we found, what we can learn from those findings, and the goal of this talk and my goal going forward is to make voting systems harder to compromise and easier to verify than the status quo. So first, to get through the basics of what we found is a deeply insecure system. One that, in my opinion at least, does not even meet the security bar for an average low-risk application, let alone critical infrastructure. These were not nitpick theoretical holes in an otherwise strong system. They were real security failures that warrant swift action and remediation going forward. The problems were not limited to the software. They were in the system's control policies, its architecture, the way it was deployed, and many of these issues were newly identified, but at least some of them had been known to the manufacturer for more than a decade. And they hadn't been repaired, even though they were clearly flagged and despite repeated federal certification.
Well, and let me just briefly pause. My prior career was in law, and so I want to say we presume the vendor was on notice, all right? Not speaking to anything that a vendor knew or did not know, but being that as we dug into this, we saw that many people had written on similar vulnerabilities. We presume they were on notice.
And I also want to be precise about what we did not find. We found extensive and largely unacceptable weaknesses, but we did not find evidence that those weaknesses were actively exploited or that votes were altered. The conclusion comes with an important caveat, though, which is we did not have access to all the data or time that would be required to conclusively investigate exploitation. So both these things can be true. There can be no evidence of compromise, but the system can still pose serious risk. The severity of these weaknesses warrant remediation, whether or not exploitation has been established. So from here, I'll walk you through our analysis and its results and its limitations. So we'll start with the threat model. Our baseline is a skilled attacker with close access. We did not assume an insider, valid credentials, stolen keys, multiplated coordinated attackers, or compromised upstream systems. The main thing we assumed was access to the same local network as the machines at some point before or during the election. Nation-state adversaries obviously operate with far more resources than what we assumed here, and critical infrastructure is normally designed against much stronger threat models. But this is a fair baseline that I think most people would agree an election system should be able to withstand. What we found is that the system we examined was not only insecure against our threat model, but in several areas it was vulnerable to substantially weaker threat models and attackers than the one we were operating under. So this is kind of the process that we took. Again, we were not invited to do a source code repository review. We began with the machines and the evidence, and the task was forensic reconstruction. We first performed complete forensic captures with clear chains of custodies, validated backups, bit-for-bit verification, and we wanted to do that for incontestability. A lot of the available material that we had access to, we had severe chain of custody problems that made data unreliable, and several red flags that turned out to be processing artifacts and red herrings. So working from the verified images let us establish that each reported issue definitely existed in the original evidence. And then after that, we went through reverse engineering. The binaries we looked at were encrypted and obfuscated, and it's still not clear to me why that was done. A meaningful portion of our time went into decryption, deobfuscation, and reconstruction before we could analyze the software itself. From there, we performed targeted code and binary analysis. The system was much larger than you might expect. Dozens of active binaries, huge amounts of legacy and dead code, and unrelated software along with the critical components. That scale, combined with the obfuscation, made extensive review impossible, but we did our best and we were extremely thorough and rigorous. We prioritized paths that could affect resulting tallies themselves rather than every vulnerability. For the most severe findings, we built and executed proof of concepts rigorously to establish the full scope of impact. And a second engineer independently replicated and documented each validated finding. This was careful work, but it was still time limited. It covered one system from one manufacturer in one jurisdiction, but we did find corroborating evidence across other deployments from the same manufacturer. But broader conclusions are going to require a deeper analysis, more systems, more manufacturer, and of course, remediation, which has still not been done, at least not at the scale we need it to be.
As far as we know.
As far as we know. Thank you, lawyer. One reason we're confident in the overall conclusion is the breadth of the findings. They were not concentrated in one defective component. They covered pretty much the whole system and 4 distinct parts of the attack surface: system controls, cryptography, commercial off-the-shelf software or COTS, and vulnerabilities endemic to the application code base itself. Each category failed differently, and each requires a different remediation path and a different way to prove that the fix worked. From here, we'll start with system controls. In the configuration we examined, LTE modems were present and active and used during system operation. The system was not air-gapped. As far as we could determine, the modems created broadly accessible ingress pathways and multiple attack paths. We believe that this is an unusual configuration, possibly related to the damaged or reduced infrastructure in Puerto Rico, and we do not assume that LTE modems exist in every deployment or even a majority of deployments. But it demonstrates that validating only the reference configuration in the lab is not enough. Much of the software was built under the assumption that no LTE or broad access was available, and those assumptions did not hold when an LTE modem was attached, creating a very broad attack surface. In addition to this, passwords were reused across permission boundaries. Many were weak and easily brute forced. Some were hard-coded into binaries, and some were barely passwords at all. Firewalls were disabled on critical systems, ports were left open, and endpoints were not adequately secure. Too many controls depended on every operator always doing the right thing and never clicking the wrong button. The audit system did not provide a truly independent safety net. Audit databases, including systems used for paper counting workflows, shared much of the same database and attack surface as the main system. When we examined the backup audit data, records were missing without explanation, and key personnel who should have been able to review them did not have access. This is partly a deployment and governance problem. A component can be certified in a lab, but certification means little if the deployed system can be configured into an insecure state. We need baseline validation of real field deployments, including connectivity, segmentation, configuration, and operational controls. We also need independent risk-limiting audits. No system eliminates the possibility of tampering, so independent statistical verification against voter-verified paper evidence is essential. The audit chain cannot share the same failure domain as the system it is supposed to check either. They must be completely independent and not subject to the same vulnerabilities. The next class of weaknesses that I'd like to cover is cryptography. Put simply, the cryptographic system was in shambles. Almost everywhere cryptography was relied upon, implementation flaws substantially weakened it or made it ineffective under our threat model. We found insufficient entropy, predictable initialization vectors, IV reuse, hard-coded material, weak trust handling, clear text transmission of keys and other sensitive information. These were not academic mistakes. They affected critical paths and created opportunities to intercept votes, manipulate data, and enter trusted boundaries or spoof devices. This is why certification has to go beyond checking whether a cryptographic module is FIPS validated. FIPS can establish that the core module performs approved cryptographic operations correctly, but it does not establish that the surrounding system generates keys safely, uses IVs correctly, authenticates endpoints, protects chain of trust, or deploys the module securely. If certification claims to cover the system, it must test how cryptography is actually used in the deployed system, not just the modules themselves. The next is the commercial software stack the system depended on. We identified at least 12 high or critical severity CVEs that could meaningfully affect system integrity. These are not 0 days, they're well known. We directly executed 5 of them. The others were confirmed through patch, version, and configuration analysis. None of these were 0 days. Once again, every one of them had been patched and fixes were available well before the election and well before certification of the machine. That is the core failure. Vulnerable software remained in a critical system long after known remedies existed, and some of that software did not even need to be installed in the system at all and served to increase the attack surface. A credible baseline must define approved minimum versions and a response process for critical CVEs. At the bare minimum, automated vulnerability scanning should prevent known vulnerable components from surviving deployment or certification. That was not true in this case. Critical CVEs in software were certified. Finally, we come to the code base itself. Some of the worst weaknesses involved flawed cryptography, but many others were endemic to the system's design and implementation. Security controls relied on attackers not knowing how they worked, security through obfuscation. Credentials and sensitive material were stored in accessible locations in plain text. Trusted decisions were based on untrustworthy endpoints. Mountains of unnecessary logic expanded the attack surface. This was a huge thing. There was tons of legacy code, which made it not only hard to analyze and audit, but increases the attack surface substantially. We encountered excessive use of self-modifying behavior, again, because the binaries were self-encrypting and they decrypted themselves in memory. Disk level hash can match an approved reference, but the code executing in memory can behave very differently. We found software absent from the official software bill of materials that could provide places to attach payloads and introduce additional exploit paths. The best structural response is to open the code base. The security critical logic should be available for meaningful, public, and independent review. Builds should be deterministic, release binaries should be signed, and their hashes published, and deployed systems should verify those hashes themselves. Open source is not a magic security property, but combined with reproducible builds and independent technical auditing, it makes hidden behavior harder to sustain and gives the public a way to verify that the system is actually running the way it is intended. Now, up to this point, the problems in the systems we examine under a deliberately conservative threat model that our electric infrastructure can and should do much better under. The core design principle is that manipulation attempts should be hard, loud, and reconcilable. I want to talk about how we can get there. So, again, hard, loud, and reconcilable. Difficult to carry out, easy to detect, and recoverable to the true underlying result. First, the deployed system should be a constrained appliance, not a general purpose computer. What we saw was a full-fledged operating system with a full development environment, compiler, and many manual ways to affect the results and data that weren't tracked in the system. It should be fully air-gapped with no remote access path. There were several remote access paths within the system we examined, even beyond the illicit ones. The operating system permitted software, and permitted software should be immutable. This is standard practice in many appliances, and there are plenty very good immutable OSs that can be run in production. Second, the software should be open source and independently verifiable. Again, deterministic builds, signed binaries, on-system hash verification. Everyone should have the right to know how the system responsible for counting their votes works. The system should produce a privacy-preserving, cryptographically immutable, append-only ledger of ballot records. This does not need to be on the blockchain. You can maintain a local immutable ledger, but the databases used were modifiable without clear chains of when they were modified or how. And we need to not only do that for the tallies and the vote system, but every action taken on the system. The databases we examined could be viewed and modified by people who should not have even had access to that database or system in the first place. And they had very little capability to detect alteration. Basic checksums and reporting were weak, and audit records were missing. Retaining evidence required to verify even a full electorate is not prohibitively expensive, but it wasn't done, not even close. Finally, verification must happen outside the appliance. That means independent security review, continuous monitoring, and retained audit logs. And independent risk-limiting audits against voter-verified paper evidence. The system cannot be the sole authority on whether the system worked. As both a security professional and a citizen, what I observed during the process deeply alarmed me. My goal now is simple. Get the problems fixed however we can. We are trying to contribute rigorous evidence, practical remediation, and a design standard that the public can independently verify. To talk more on how we move that work forward, I'd like to turn it back to Jason. Thank you.
So we're going to open up for questions in a second, but... Way to go, Manbir. Look, the fact is with all of that wrapped up, I have more confidence in my smart fridge than I do in our critical infrastructure when it comes to elections, right? Many people ask me why I hold the opinion, why this is in the state that it is. I've only been able to form somewhat of a policy opinion after deep diving some of the regulations and statutes related to this. And it's my opinion that vendors are obviously not setting out to create insecure systems, but they have insufficient motivation to keep them updated, right? And in fact, we overlay then the statutes and regulations of the Election Assistance Commission, the EAC, and believe it or not, our US government's ham-handed approach to try to solve cybersecurity through statute didn't work. I know. I'm going to let that sink in for a second, just kind of hold that for a moment. And what it has done is created this almost anti-incentive for innovation and security progress by establishing golden image constructs that some vendors, through my review, I believe, read as not even able to patch the security problems when they're discovered without going back through a very arduous process. The other issue is that the EAC for many years enforced what's called the VVSG 1.0 standard. That was written in 2005. I don't know if any of you were doing cybersecurity in 2005. It didn't really exist. So most of the machines are certified to a 2005 standard. There's no business case to invest money or infrastructure in changing it. And then when you do change it, the government puts you through a rigorous process to even get it to market. Perhaps this has created a problem. And my answer to the problem is that we need to take it out of the hands of politics, we need to take it out of the hands of government, and we need to privatize the solution. We need to, as Americans, take responsibility for our voting systems. And how are we going to do that? Well, yesterday, I filed the papers to start a 501c3 to do exactly that. And that is the Open Source the Vote initiative by the Machine Assurance Institute. It's what I've called it. I am going to start soliciting participation, donations, and monies so that we can be the highest secure cybersec standard that we absolutely deserve and have earned as an American body that are producing things like Mythos. I don't know if you've heard about it. Pretty big cybersecurity thing. Might help this situation, right? And we need to call upon IT leaders, we need to call upon government, and we need to call upon ourselves to get involved and to make it a incentive benefit for vendors to come privately submit their software for review, allow us to review it, secure it, improve it, give it back to them without any sort of business case or commercialism attached. Believe it or not, I think vendors will actually participate in that. And then ultimately, we can start moving to an open source standard that will allow us to know that our voting systems are traceable, auditable, secured, and immutably logged so that we never have a 2020 debate ever again. Are there any questions? Go for it.
Mike. Okay. In my jurisdiction, the election office makes a big deal. Oh, we're going to have the certification of the voting machines, and the public is invited to come and witness this.
Yes.
Is there any meaningful input that a citizen can provide at that point?
Well, let me ask you this. What certification and who's doing it?
The election office has written the certification, and they are performing the inspection.
Very rarely have I found anything that exists, at least in open source review, where an election office has the technical aptitude or the specialty to do any of this work well.
So typically as we've been operating, the current status quo is we operate against the VVSG 1.0 standard that purely certifies functionality, meaning you put in a vote under the lab certified settings and the count comes out correct. And then past that, all of the checks are just verifying that hashes match. But they might very well be verifying that hashes match to an insecure platform, verifying in fact that the system operating is insecure. I think that the best you can do is to challenge that to some degree, but even when we've engaged with vendors, again, the movement is just not there to push them to want to update their software, to patch fixes, and this sort of thing.
Yeah. And I will say that I have been surprised at almost the vendor paranoia about participation, even in the classic VBSG certification process. I can't really explain it. You would think they would want to be participating and kind of upfront and leading with security mindsets. I think it has to do with just kind of the drama, let's say, of 2020 and the fear around that something will attach to them. But again, that's why I want to create a system where people can come and we can certify to a real standard, right? With experts, with people that know this stuff. And we can say, hey, it's not a government certification, it's better, right? It's a certification that you're end-to-end secure to standard practice. One more question.
I just got to ask if you guys have come across VotingWorks in any of your research, because they're an open source voting system.
I have come across VotingWorks, and I admire them, I will say. I'm not saying all vendors everywhere. Absolutely.
Right.
In fact, I think they were the first one to meet the 2.0 standard.
They are still not in.
Really?
Smartmatic was the first, I believe. No, Hard was the first, sorry.
Okay.
Let's take this discussion offline, okay? But listen, let's thank this.